Week 6 fantasy football is kicking off here tonight, Thursday night football. I got a fun one for you guys. We're going right into it with my quarterbacks, then tight ends and defense rankings for week 6. Starting it off with S tier, we have the mobile quarterbacks that everyone knows and everyone loves. Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts, all mobile, all great for fantasy, and all should be started in every single league. Going into A tier, I have 5 guys. No, not the restaurant chain. I'm talking about 5 guys who are top 8 in passing yards so far this season. I got Drake May versus the Saints. He played a great game versus the Buffalo Bills. They won the game, but he sold for fantasy. Stevenson found the end zone twice on the ground. 1 bad game, 4 good ones, and now he gets the Saints, who have been very nice to quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes versus the Detroit Lions, 50.5 point over-under. Patrick Mahomes leads the Kansas City Chiefs in rushing yards, which is absolutely bonkers. But what's insane is he's the quarterback 2, and he's had 4 games with only 1 touchdown. He gets Rashee Rice back next week too, by the way. Dak Prescott versus the Panthers in Carolina. He won't get CeeDee Lamb back this week, but he's been incredible without Lamb. He's the quarterback 4 on the season, and he's in my lineups in week 6. Baker Mayfield versus the San Francisco 49ers. It seems like just every week Baker and the Bucs are getting into a shootout. He's coming off his best game of the season, and he gets 3 consecutive matchups that are just chef's kiss. Justin Herbert versus the Miami Dolphins in Miami. The offensive line has been a problem, but now without a strong run game, they may attempt to pass the ball more, which they were already passing at the 6th highest rate in the entire NFL. So versus the Dolphins, who are 3rd easiest for quarterbacks, I like Justin Herbert. Going into B tier, I do start it off with Jordan Love. B tier is pretty fun because you can move all these guys around from quarterback 9 to quarterback 14. Jordan Love versus the Cincinnati Bengals. Quarterbacks versus the Bengals have averaged 18 points per game. It's not the easiest matchup, but the Bengals can get ran on just as easy. So that's the kind of scary part. You need it to happen through the air. And Josh Jacobs, we know, can get it done on the ground. Jared Goff, just last week, who I mentioned in this same exact matchup, threw for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns, so a little luck is needed here. Caleb Williams versus the Washington Commanders. I'm really excited for this game. You got the 1st overall pick, you got the 2nd overall pick, battling it out, 49.5 point over-under. It should be a great back-and-forth game. And again, I said you can mix these guys as much as you want. If you want to put somebody a little higher, somebody a little lower, that's perfectly fine. Matthew Stafford versus Baltimore is coming in at about the middle of this tier. Quarterbacks have cooked the Ravens so far this season. Patrick Mahomes just 2 weeks ago threw for 4 touchdowns. CJ Stroud, just threw 4 touchdowns against them. Now imagine what Stafford could do with Puka, Adams, Kyron. The only hesitation again is you have to make sure that the touchdowns come through the air, not on the ground. Justin Fields versus the Denver Broncos in London. He was my quarterback 4 last week, and it ended up being the quarterback 3. So I'll take a small victory lap on that, but it was not the prettiest matchup. And I mentioned that. I said you don't want to watch the first 3 quarters. Because through the first 3 quarters, he had about 5 fantasy points. So it was very, very scary for the people that I had advised that you should be starting Justin Fields. Now I'm going to be going on the opposite end of that. Fully flipped to the other side. The Broncos are 3rd best against quarterbacks, so I'd really like to avoid Justin Fields this week. Daniel Jones versus the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals are 5th against quarterbacks, so the matchup is not nice. And Danny Dimes has been serviceable in good streaming situations. This matchup does not permit that. Bo Nix versus the Jets in London. The Jets give up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. Again, you can move anyone in B tier all around. I'm going to be moving them around, so this is not how they're going to be staying. As defensive players go out, I'll be adjusting the rankings. You can either come to one of my live streams and see the rankings there, or just click the link in my bio and find the rankings there as well. Now going on to C tier, I've got a lot of people who are quarterback 15 or later, so they are strictly streaming options. 99% of the start-sit questions that I get about quarterbacks are about the guys in A tier or in B tier. Not really about the people in C tier or below. So I'm going to kind of blitz through a lot of these. Of course, I'm still going to rank all 32 because there are people who play in super flex leagues. There are people who play in much deeper leagues. You'll see Brock Purdy has a great matchup for the Bucs. You'll also see that on Wednesday, he's not practicing. So if he's out, Mac Jones will go somewhere into this tier, probably closer to the end next to Trevor Lawrence and Tua. Tyler faces the Colts on the road, and they're 6th best against quarterbacks, so he's going to be a bit of an avoid for me. Bryce Young has the Cowboys, which are the easiest matchup for quarterbacks. I can't recommend you start Young because I don't want to be liable for what he's going to do to your fantasy team, but I can tell you that the matchup is as good as it gets. Now, going on to D tier, I have Michael Penix Jr., Spencer Rattler, and Geno Smith. With these three guys, I feel like we're going back and forth whether they're going to get benched each and every single week, which is not what I like to see out of my quarterback. The variance from Michael Penix Jr. and Geno Smith is just too much. The floor is about 5 points, and the ceiling is decent, but I really don't want what's supposed to be my highest scoring player on my fantasy roster giving me a week-ruining performance. With Rattler, he's consistently not horrible, but he doesn't really have the weapons to give you a week-winning fantasy week, and I also never want to start a quarterback where I have to say he's consistently not horrible. Again, I told you guys I would rank each and every single quarterback, so here are the E and F tier guys. Dylan Gabriel has a favorable matchup, Aaron Rodgers has a bad matchup. Not going to go into too much detail about these guys. Alright, let's get into tight ends. S tier, I have Trey McBride, Jake Ferguson, Tyler Warren, and Brock Bowers if he suits up. So all these guys should be started. I'm going out on a limb and saying that Brock Bowers doesn't play. He's not practicing again. What's worrisome is, I mentioned it last week, the Raiders have a bye week in week 8, and this could be a long-term injury. I'm not sure they want to risk their, superstar, phenom, 22-year-old Brock Bowers for a team that's not really competitive here in 2025. Now, going on to A tier of the tight ends, I promise there's a method to my madness. These guys are ranked a little bit weird, but again, red means bad matchup, green means good matchup. So Tucker Kraft is coming ahead of Dalton Kincaid. Tucker Kraft plays the Bengals, who are the easiest matchup for tight ends. That's why he's at the top of A tier. If you ask me rest of season who I would like, Tucker Kraft or Dalton Kincaid, I'm going to go Dalton Kincaid. But in week 6, I'm going Tucker Kraft because of the matchup. And just as I said with Dalton Kincaid, he's got a red tag around him. He's got a bad matchup. He's got the worst matchup. The Falcons are the hardest matchup for tight ends. He's still a top 6 play for me this week, but just know that the matchup is not ideal. And then Sam Laporta versus the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are third toughest against tight ends, but with the tight end landscape how it is, I'm really cool with rolling out Sam Laporta in a game that has a 50.5 point over-under. And Darren Waller versus the Chargers. The Chargers are pretty strong against tight ends, but Darren Waller is still ramping up in this offense. He's looked awesome so far in the season. He's going to be a focal point for the offense, especially in the end zone, which is where he leads the team in targets over these past 2 weeks. And then in B tier, all by himself, we do have Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce plays the Detroit Lions. Again, 50.5 point over-under, so I want basically everyone in this. There's a lot of guys emerging from the waiver wire, but I'm still comfortable rolling out Travis Kelce in a must-win game for the Chiefs. And I talked about a lot of the guys on the waiver wire, so if you saw the episode, these are going to be some familiar faces. I got David Njoku kicking off C tier at Pittsburgh. I mentioned the Browns receiving weapons. We didn't really know who was going to emerge as Dylan Gabriel's favorite target, but it turns out it was David Njoku. Let's see if that continues going into week 6. And then Mason Taylor versus the Denver Broncos. This one right here, over the past 2 weeks, Mason Taylor leads the Jets over Garrett Wilson in targets and receptions. He also leads all tight ends in the NFL over the last 2 weeks in targets and receptions. Is he the number one in this offense? No, it's still Garrett Wilson, but it's encouraging to see that the rookie is taking a step forward and making his place known in this offense. Henry versus the Saints. The Saints are the 6th easiest matchup for tight ends, but with Diggs emerging so far in these last 2 games, Hunter Henry has taken a backseat in the pecking order, so you really need a touchdown to be happy with Hunter Henry. And then Theo Johnson versus the Philadelphia Eagles. For those who have been listening for a few weeks, you know that I mentioned Theo Johnson as soon as the quarterback change happened. Dart loves his tight ends, and Theo Johnson leads them in end zone targets over these last 2 weeks with Dart. The matchup isn't great. The Eagles are 4th best against tight ends, but with Darius Slayton already out for this Thursday night matchup, he's going to have to be going to his known pass catchers. Going into D tier, I do start it off with a couple of guys you've seen before. Kyle Pitts versus Buffalo. Pitts really depends on what you're going to get from Michael Penix. Michael Penix has looked good, and he's looked absolutely awful. So it just depends on what you're going to get from Michael Penix. It is worth noting that the Bills are 2nd best against tight ends. Now, Dallas Goedert versus the Giants. Again, Thursday Night Football. I feel like I'm slandering Goddard's name because I have him this low, but it really needs to be a touchdown for you to be happy with him. I'm not chasing it. You're welcome to, but there are just some better options in C tier that you could have got off waivers or maybe still on waivers that I'd rather start over Dallas Goedert. And you'll see this nameless player. Who is this? Who is this? This is Jake Tonjes. That's going to be the tight end 7 over these last 2 weeks. He plays the Bucks. Do we get another Jake Tonjes game? Possibly. I mean, George Kittle is going to be out for this game. Everything's pointing to that. We need to find out if Ricky Pearsall and Juwan Jennings are suiting up, because if they don't, Jake Tonjes could be someone that goes into your fantasy lineups. And then Harold Fannin Jr. versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. I talked about Njoku coming out as Dylan Gabriel's favorite target, but could it swap between tight ends on each and every single given week? Possibly, but right now I'd rather start Njoku over Fannin, but Fannin is somebody you could stream in a very, very deep pinch. And then E tier, again, I'm obligated to show you these guys. E and F tier, you're really banking on a touchdown from any of them because the volume recently just hasn't been there for these guys. All right, let's wrap this thing up with defenses. I am starting it off with the S tier defenses, Green Bay Packers versus the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals offense has been giving up the most fantasy points to opposing fantasy defense, so we should be targeting them each and every single week. The Los Angeles Rams versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Rams are supposed to be a smash pick against the 49ers when they had all of their backup players, so let's hope this one doesn't come back to bite us in the butt. We don't know who the quarterback is going to be for the Baltimore Ravens just yet, but we do know that it's not going to be Lamar Jackson. Philadelphia Eagles versus the New York Giants. If we could pick on rookie quarterbacks with our defenses, we're going to. Dart's first primetime game, Thursday Night Football. He just gave up the ball 3 times versus the Saints, so the Eagles should feast in this matchup as well. And then going on to the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Browns. I love the matchup, again, versus another rookie quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. Going on to the A-tier defenses, we're going to kick it off with the Denver Broncos versus the New York Jets in London. The Broncos have been awesome so far on the season against quarterbacks, and Justin Fields just came off a game where he really didn't look good until garbage time versus the Cowboys, who are the easiest matchup for quarterbacks. The New England Patriots versus the Saints. I talked about the Patriots in my waiver wire video earlier this week. They have a favorable matchup versus the Saints, but they also are a streaming option versus some of the lowest scoring offenses in the NFL versus the Titans, Browns, and the Falcons. Colts versus the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals have barely scored over 20 points per game, and the offense looks like it's imploding. The Colts against bad offenses they've played so far this season, so like the Dolphins, the Titans, the Raiders, have been top-notch for fantasy, and I don't think that the Cardinals are any exception to that rule. The Cleveland Browns versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Browns' defensive line will be one of, if not the strongest, that Aaron Rodgers has faced so far this season. It's a 38.5 point over-under, so it's the lowest of the week, if nothing else. Going on to the B tier, I have the Seattle Seahawks versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jags have looked better, but still a little cartoony at times, making bonehead plays, and somehow they work. Just think about the Trevor Lawrence falling twice and then falling into the end zone play to beat the Kansas City Chiefs. Baker and the Bucs just lit up the defense for the Seattle Seahawks, but they were battling injuries, so it's something that I'm going to keep an eye on as they get key players back. Now, on the other side of the ball, Jags versus the Seahawks. The Jags have the most takeaways per game in the NFL. Can Sam Darnold throw the ball away to the Jacksonville Jaguars? Absolutely. Buffalo Bills at Atlanta. This is where it really depends on Michael Penix Jr. I talked about it with Kyle Pitts. All the pass catchers, everyone all depends on Michael Penix Jr. because he touches the ball each and every single play. So we've had some awful play from Michael Penix Jr. We've had some great play for Michael Penix Jr. 3 of his starts have been top 12 quarterback performances, while the other 4 have been 25th or worse quarterback performances. So it's a gamble which Michael Penix you're going to get. And next up, I have the Chargers versus the Miami Dolphins. You've got not a lot of good playmakers on the Dolphins, so you're just really hoping that the Chargers can capitalize in this matchup. And then in C tier, all by themselves, I have the Raiders versus the Tennessee Titans. This is really the last defense I'm confident in on ones that you could stream. It's not because the defense is good. They're okay. But it's because the Titans are dead last in the NFL in scoring, 14.6 points per game. And Cam Ward has taken the most sacks. 19 sacks is the highest in the NFL. And then in D tier, as I mentioned, C tier is really the last options that I would go with. But if you're in a deeper league, maybe people are holding 2 defenses or something like that. D tier has some options where bad defenses are going against bad offenses, which is always sketchy. Or it's an average defense versus an average or above average offense. I still don't want to be targeting any of these defenses if I don't have to. And then I'm going to lump them together. E and F tier, it's a lot of teams, I know. But in a 12-team league, God help your soul if you have to start any of these defenses here. It's ugly after C tier, but none of the matchups are ideal for fantasy football. And that's it for the quarterback, tight end, and defense rankings. If you have any other questions for me, feel free to drop it in the comments below and let me know. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell so you know when I go live, and good luck in your matchups in week 6.